having a really great day. And I thought today I would talk about something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize. And there's probably good reason for why they don't know this because it's not something that um, is really advertised or in the forefront of things. But it has to do with yoga credentials and what someone's required to have before they can teach. And here in Missouri, where I'm located, and really in many, if not most states, you might be surprised to find out that there are very few legal requirements for who is allowed to teach a yoga class. And that really it's up to the individual studio or gym to decide what their requirements are and what kind of requirements they will enforce and use when they're hiring. So in most places, if the studio is okay with it, and often you'll hear stories of this where someone's been taking a yoga class for quite a while, and then the yoga teacher who normally is teaching is out sick for a while or taking a break, and someone who has just done it for quite a while says, well, I could sub it, and then they start teaching it, and then sometimes take a class of their own and are teaching yoga with potentially no training or certified training in yoga. And so I know I didn't realize that when I first started practicing yoga. And so I assumed that when I went to a studio, that all the teachers had kind of the same base training and that the studio sort of checked on all of that and had everything all sort of on the quote unquote up and up. And it's not necessarily that it's not on the up and up, it's legal to do it this way. But I really assumed because I had previously been a certified personal trainer and I knew the training I had to do and the test I had to take and the continuing education I had to do in order to keep my certification. So I kind of assumed that that was just always required for anybody doing group classes or teaching of any sort. So it was a bit of a surprise to me to realize that that was not the requirement and not the case. And so I thought we should talk about that so that you know. And you may have then in the same studio or the same gym, you may have someone who has a 200 or a 300-hour training, a 500-hour training, and you may have someone who has a one-day intensive training or a shorter training. And they may all just be on the schedule in the same way, and they may not be labeled. Sometimes they will. And so an RYT is a registered yoga teacher, often through an organization called Yoga Alliance, is probably the most well-known, which is an accrediting body that governs their schools and makes sure that their curriculum is following the set guidelines. And there are some requirements, again, that someone has enough teaching hours, enough continuing ed hours, and has their insurance and all of that to stay as a registered yoga teacher. And it's also not enough. Sometimes if you read bios or if you call a studio and say, hey, I was thinking about taking this class, can you tell me what that teacher's training is? Often now there will be teachers who say, well, I have a 100-hour training and I have a 300-hour training or a 2, and they'll use that terminology. And they very well may have, and they may have spent that amount of time, and it may have been great. But if you are really wanting to verify that it's an accredited program, if that's important to you, you want to ask, right? And say, okay, well, who is that 200-hour registered with, or who are you registered with? Where was it held, and where are you registered, or who accredited your training? Because just like anybody can teach yoga, anybody can offer a training. Anybody can go out there and say, hey, I'm going to offer a 200-hour yoga training or a 100-hour, whatever, and say that it focuses on this and that. And again, it could be great, And I'm not saying it's not worth taking or valuable, but if you think that it's going to lead to being able to register with an accrediting organization, you want to double check before you sign up so that you're just clear on what you're going to be able to do with your finished training. Because more and more now, studios will say and require, or at least some will say, you need to be a registered yoga teacher. And there are only some schools and who are cleared to offer a registered yoga teacher 200-hour training, because they have to go through that vetting with that organization and be sure that they're cleared to do that. So those are things to know, that if it's something you care about, that you could check on the website and see what type of trainings someone has. You could call the studio and ask about the bios of their teachers. But also when you're hearing the bios or looking at the bios, double check that they're telling you where they are registered through, if that's something that's important to you, or that you know to ask that element. That's not just enough to have taken a 200-hour training if it was from their friend who offered them 200 hours to talk about yoga. It may be great and they may have learned a lot, but if that's not what you're looking for, you just want to be able to know that what to ask. And again, there's always going to be pros and cons, right? It is not as if every single registered yoga teacher is a great yoga teacher that you're going to love or does everything the way you want them to. Similar to any kind of education or training or certification, right? There's always going to be a little bit of nuance to it, right? Just like a bachelor's degree doesn't mean that person is smarter than someone else or a better hire than someone else might be that doesn't have that same degree. But you know that person did go through a certain amount and a certain type of education that you may want to require before you take a physical practice from them. And if you go on a path to want to take a yoga teacher training, you will definitely want to know that not all of them will be able to register through an accrediting body unless they have been approved by that accrediting body. And so again, that accredited body, there's pros and cons to it. It's not as if, again, there can't be bad apples that get through, but there are at least still requirements that are held of those registered yoga teachers. There's oversight. The program was accredited. There's continuing ed requirements. There's number of teaching hours that they have to maintain, that type of thing. So there is at least an attempt at some oversight that's not going to be there in other ways. Because again, anybody can create a teacher training. So I'm accredited through the Yoga Alliance organization that I mentioned earlier. It's the most well-known. There are several stages of their registration. So the base is called a 200 RYT, registered yoga teacher. And that teacher has undergone a minimum of 200 hours, again, through a registered yoga school, through an RYS. And then, so I got that. I finished in 2017 with that. And then I became a 200E RYT, which means experienced is what the E stands for. And you reach that by having taught over 1,000 hours of yoga. So I reached that a little while ago, about a year ago. And then you can add, once you have your 200, you can add an additional 300-hour training to become a 500 RYT, which is a registered yoga teacher who's taken both a 200 and a 300-hour training. The 300-hour you can only take if you have a 200 already under your belt. And so it's a little more in depth in certain areas or talks about kind of next element, more advanced sorts of things. So then you can become a 500 RYT, and then also start to offer some continuing ed to other RYTs who are, at that 200 range. And then eventually you can also become a 500 ERYT, which I should get to probably towards spring, which means you've taught over 200 or 2,000 hours, and have done it for, I think, a minimum of 3 or 4 years, something like that. So I believe that at least being well versed and understanding and making sure that you're comfortable with your teacher, because again, there are going to be great teachers out there who aren't registered through an accrediting body, just like there are going to be some yoga teachers that you don't enjoy who are, right? There's always going to be that. But credentialing is important to me. I think there's value in it. And so, as I said, in 2017, I finished my 200 RYT. And actually, I'm pretty excited to tell you that this spring and summer, I finished my 300 hour. And so I now have a little new credential there. I took through a registered yoga school down in Texas. So I am now a 500 RYT, which you may have seen pop up on my page or on my website. So I think right now I'm the only 500 RYT in Kirksville. And like I said, by spring, summer, I should be at that top E 500 RYT. So I'm pretty excited to have achieved that. It's a lot of hours. I loved the process, though, of learning more about this practice so that I can help you all even more with your practice and teach you from an even stronger breadth and depth of knowledge myself. So I'm always looking forward to learning new things. I have more books I plan to read, and thankfully my registered yoga school, I still get access to new things that they're creating. So I'm super excited about that opportunity and all I'm going to be able to offer you. So that's what I wanted you to know about credential, but also I wanted to tell you about my new credential, because again, I think it's valuable and shows a commitment, and I think that's important. So anyway, I hope to see you soon, either virtually in class or in person at the new studio. So let me know if you have any questions about this or anything else. As you know, always happy to talk yoga.